is our show called again?
It's time to relax. You know what that means.
Turn on that radio and back here.
Incoming message from the big giant head.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Tonight's program is pre-recorded. I, however, am live now.
By the powers vested in me by the Federal Communications Commission, I command you to get on the microphone in a serious manner and continue this broadcast.
Now we are ready to begin. Open your book and we will start the story.
Hey guys, what's going on? You are listening to This Week in Geek and Nerd to the Third Powers, the B-Sides. That's right, the show that comes on approximately once a month, much like a holiday special that you can't quite remember, but you're going to celebrate anyway, because hey, it's a day off school, work, or whatever. I'm one of your hosts today. I'm Mike the Birdman, joining us all the way from jolly old fucking England.
Hello, I'm Skyblaze.
That's right. I'm coming in here, bringing the energy, bringing the heat, because, I don't know, I've probably had too many G Fuels already. Use code FUYA for, I don't know, some percentage off, usually about 10%. She's my friend, and I like her. Go FUYA. Anyway, so, in this month's episode of The B-Side, we were talking before the show, and the original plan in our pilot episode was to do these about twice a month. However, with the unbelievable amount of crap I'm doing, if you follow my Twitter at BirdmanDodd, I'm involved in so much stuff that it's a little much. But thankfully, due to Skyblaze and her schedule and my schedules, we can definitely align but once a month. But that gives us an opportunity to bring something a little bit more interesting to you. More like the old Twig topic shows of old, but very little research, but a lot of opinion and a lot of experience will come out in this episode. So I guess to kind of start things off, let's see what's been going on with you, Skyblaze. It's been about a month since I've talked with you, and what the fuck is up?
Well, run up to Christmas, so been quite a bit of work I've been doing. Because for those who don't know, I work as a games journalist. So as we get closer to Christmas, more and more work starts piling up.
Yeah. Oh, God, don't I know that. I just got an email from one of the big PR companies that hadn't talked with us in a really long time. And then this week, hey, here's every game we've ever put out this year. So, okay, that's a lot. So after this podcast, I literally have to jump into another game review because, as you mentioned, holiday gift guides are coming up. So that's a lot of stuff to consider. And if you might have missed when the game came out in June or July or even February or something like of this year, you have to get a feel for it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to roll credits on everything, but you still have to put in your due kind of diligence.
I'll tell you what, though, I did manage to pick up a copy of Persona Q2, New Cinema Labyrinth, on the 3DS, for a non-absurd price.
How much?
£45.
Not bad. I remember seeing that in my local Walmarts once upon a time, and it just never clicked with me because I wasn't into Persona yet. Kicking myself in the ass now.
Yeah, I roll credits on Persona Strikers.
Good game.
It's really good. And so I was like, I need more Persona. What's available? I've already got Persona 4 on Steam. Persona 3 is like gold dust. So, Persona Q2. Yes, that'll do nicely. Thank you very much.
I've got the Persona dancing games, but I haven't played any of them. I bought them when they were on sale like last year or something, and I got all three for like, I think it was like $20. So I really want to play Persona 5 Dancing in Starlight. I just wish they had like a Kasumi character, and maybe they do. Hell, I would pay, if they told me they were going to do Persona 5 Strikers Royal like they did, and there's like just having Kasumi as a new playable character and just inserting her in certain scenes. And as long as she was like, you could do something with her, maybe like a new dungeon or a new boss, I'd pay for that. I'd pay for that all day.
Because Strikers and Royal were developed in parallel, so...
Yeah, there's got to be a way to do it. I mean, because that's a game I want to play again. Like, I had a stupidly good time with it, although when I started playing it back in February, that's when my gallbladder decided, hey, I'm going to murder you. And then my liver was like, hey, can I get in on the fun? So I didn't beat the game until like July.
I've been through this myself, and yeah, it's pretty fucking miserable.
Yeah, so gaming is wonderful. I actually just finally beat, as of this recording, last night I rolled credits on Mass Effect Legendary Edition. I did the entire trilogy as FemShep. I romanced Liara for the first time as a female character, and that was really nice. That was actually kind of beautiful. And if you follow my Twitter, I take a lot of screenshots. Man, I wonder if there's a gig somewhere out there to play games and capture screenshots for articles or for pictures. Like, I wouldn't want to capture video footage because let me tell you right now, there's a reason I don't do video other than the fact I've got a face for friggin' radio. I hate video editing. My God, when I was in college, like a million years ago, that was the bane of my existence. Ask me to edit audio all day. I'll take out the lowest frequencies you can ask me to do. When it comes to the video editing, I'd rather put my head into a meat slicer. Oh, I hate it so much. But we have rambled on long enough.
We have.
So, allow me to introduce you to this month's B-side selection. And this month's B-side selection, which you've probably found from a guy on the street corner selling you cassette tapes in 2021. But this cassette tape happens to come from an era and a time and place that is very special and very relevant to this time of year. We're going to be talking about tabletop role-playing games. Big surprise, but there's a twist. There's always a twist. We're going to talk about horror role-playing games or scary role-playing games because me and Skyblaze, we've been around the block. I've been playing since 1992, various different systems. And during that time, I've encountered a lot of different horror-type games. And it's not something a lot of people get a chance to talk about that isn't like, you know, Call of Cthulhu, though that will most certainly come up in this conversation. There are others and some experiences that are both good and bad with them. So that's what we're going to kind of talk about today, our kind of experiences with tabletop role-playing games that are scary. I'm even going to mention some LARP stories in here because, woo. So I guess who wants to go first here, Skyblaze, me or you?
I think you should go first. I think you should have a little intro to get the feel of things.
Okay, cool. So, as most of you know, tabletop role-playing games, there's a wide variety of different ones, although the most popular is most often going to be Dungeons & Dragons, which is currently in its 5th edition, and even this year did release some scary content, mostly in the form of Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, which I highly recommend, by the way. And then last year, there was the Curse of Strahd box set, which came out in a coffin-shaped container, which was about $100, and I think it's pretty easily available on like Amazon and places like that. But Ravenloft is the default quote-unquote scary gothic horror setting for D&D. And role players in the 80s didn't have a whole lot of choice for horror role playing that I'm aware of. They had D&D and Ravenloft. You had Call of Cthulhu in the early 80s. I want to say 81 is when the first edition came out. And then later on, moving into the 90s, we would get like Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the Apocalypse, Hunter the Reckoned, Demon the Fallen, Wraith the Oblivion.
Oh, and on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah, and on and on and on. There's like a million things, but that was one of the first examples of a really well-constructed, interconnected kind of universe. But yeah, like, and you could introduce scary elements into your games. Like, one of the earliest source books that I ever got my hands on in the 1990s is I was playing GURPS at the time, which is done by Steve. Yeah, so Steve Jackson Games, this was the 3rd edition I think I was playing. And GURP stands for Generic Universal Role-Playing System. And they had a book that came out, and I thought the cover art was fantastic, but it was the pitch that caught me. And it was called Cthulhu Punk. And Cthulhu Punk took their cyber world setting, which was a separate source book that at one point was seized by the Department of Defense in the United States because they thought it was like a hacking manual. No, it really wasn't. And it crossed it with the worlds of H.P. Lovecraft. And you can just imagine all the insanity you can get into there. Like, sure, I've got a rail gun that can fire a projectile at nearly the speed of light. What's that going to do against Yog Sagoth or some shit like that? Here's the answer: not a lot. But the idea behind cyberpunk is it's loud, it's chrome, it's violent. And, just because you have I think there's a piece of gear in cyberpunk called the Chain Ripper, just because you can wield that against, a Shoggoth, it doesn't mean you're going to win. So that kind of got me into horror kind of role playing. And I was like, that's really fascinating. And then you could adapt that to another game, like say Shadowrun, which came out in the 80s and has had multiple editions since, and kind of blend magic and technology. So imagine Lord of the Rings if there were cybernetics in it, sort of thing. High magic and high tech would be a good way to think about it. And I started falling into another camp because the book caught my attention, but they also gave away this little mini novel. It was like a excerpt at my local game store, and it was for Vampire the Masquerade. So Vampire the Masquerade, I remember getting for Christmas, and I want to say 1996 or 1997. I was in high school. I remember that. I was in grades 9 or 10, and it was the kind of emerald green cover with the rose on it. And I kind of got into it. I'm thinking, wow, this is really fascinating. And my first clan source book, which I still have, was Clan Nosferatu. And the main reason I got it, because, well, it was the only source book available at my store at the time, but it was one of the most interesting works of fiction that I'd ever read, because I never thought of the Nosferatu vampires being anything more than that weird silent film that we've all seen that clip from 1,000 times. And I started learning about the interconnection of the Masquerade, the different clans, like the Ventru, the Malkavians, the Bruja. And there was even a short-lived television show in the 1990s called
Kindred the Embraced. Yeah, I remember
exactly,
that.
Which was fantastic in some ways, really lame in others, but it showed promise. So
Until one of the lead actors died in, I think, a car crash.
Yeah, car crash or a motorcycle accident. Yeah, the guy that played Julian Moon. So that's unfortunate. I think the show ended after 9 episodes because of that, though they did intend to go longer. And then I found out there was like card games based on vampire. There were more games set in the same universe. Again, I'd never seen this, because at that time my knowledge of like D&D was remarkably little. I knew of Ravenloft, I knew of Dark Sun, but because where I was geographically, importing these books was ludicrously expensive. eBay was in its infancy, so ordering them wasn't exactly easy either. So if I ever came across a Ravenloft source book, it would be at a used bookstore and they didn't know what they had. So I started getting into this, and I started seeing Vampire the Masquerade card games. I saw Werewolf the Apocalypse. And then the World of Darkness, which is what it was called by White Wolf Publishing, did this event, and I went in whole hog. And it was called the Time of Judgment.
Oh, yeah.
And the Time of Judgment, for those of you that don't know, was a classic world-ending event. Kind of like how in old school D&D, before 3rd edition came out, there was an adventure written called the Apocalypse Stone. And you might recall, a lot of this is probably going to sound familiar because another YouTuber once upon a time covered very, very similar topics, but that's where I've gained some of my research from. So just so you people are fully aware, I am parroting some words. But at the same time, my research led me to Time of Judgment way before I met this person. And I was interested because what the Time of Judgment was, I'd never seen a game world or game line end. And basically in each of the main games from White Wolf, there were events that would happen that would lead to the end of that particular game world or the world as a whole. And there was no canonical ending to the world. It was up to you to pick it. And for Vampire the Masquerade, the event was called Guyana, I think, or Gihana.
Mhm.
And that is where all the ancient vampires who are like second or third generation, so the Methuselahs of the vampire world, woke up and are now going to devour their kin and basically go on a blood rage to kill everything. Whereas in other games, the apocalypse for werewolf and the Garou nations, they would find out there's this creature called, there's the worm and the weaver. I think I'm leaving one out, Gaia or something. And basically certain events would trigger in their world that would lead to apocalypse. Like maybe the worms become too powerful, the black spiral dancers are out of control, or the weaver has gone mad truly, and now technology, basically like the Borg and cybernetics have gone out of control. Like there could be any number of different ecological disasters, or maybe the werewolves are holding people captive to breed them to make sure people survive. But the game line that really caught my attention, because it had this very striking yellow book, or orange book, sorry, was called Hunter the Reckoning.
Oh, yeah.
And this game I love. And my friend Darla, bless her heart, sent me a lot of the source books I was missing within the last year for this line. And I got into it because there was a game store that was going out of business in Mississauga, Ontario in the 90s. And I had probably $100 to my name because I grew up poor, and my grandparents' idea of a allowance in those days was, oh, here's $10. That'll last you the week. Yeah. So I'd saved up about $100, and they were blowing out their entire line of Hunter the Reckoning books for about $5 to $10 a piece.
Wow.
So I grabbed as many as I could get my hands on. And that's what got me interested more so in the world of darkness. Vampire hooked me, but it was Hunter that made me more interested in that world. For those of you that don't know, Hunter the Reckoning is sort of the human response, because every other creature in the world of darkness, they're either vampires or they're ghosts or they're demons. There's something supernaturally powered. But people, ordinary people, they can be affected by the delirium. They can be, when a vampire bites them, they can have their wounds sealed by the vampire, just kind of licks the wounds and they go away. And they forget that it ever happened. In Hunter, the messengers, which I don't think they ever describe who they are, have decided enough's enough. It's time for humanity to fight back. And there are different character types and classes that they're called the imbued. And the imbued might be an Avenger, for example. And I don't mean to sound like Captain America, but your person, you would become awakened or imbued with power because you saw one of these supernatural creatures, and at that moment you decided to act. And you might see on a billboard or on your cell phone screen, innocents are being attacked. What are you going to do? Do you stand and avenge them, or do you let something happen? And that's your imbuing. If you choose to act, you get supernatural abilities. If you don't, you become painfully aware of what's going on, but any chance you had to grab hold of that power is gone.
It's also worth noting that even with these supernatural powers, the hunters are kind of very bottom of the kind of power totem pole.
Yeah, they're very weak. Yeah, like as Skyblaze says, you are not exactly, if you take on a Garou in its full war form, it's not going to end well for you. You're probably going to end up splattered like a paint can.
Yeah, you will be chunky salsa.
Yeah, so it's basically you and your friends choosing to fight back. And I always love the idea of, say, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, of having people fight back, ordinary people fight back against the darkness. And in World of Darkness, there are people that are hedge mages, there are psychics, and sure, there are mages, which are technically people, but they're still manipulating stuff that they shouldn't. Hunters are just everyday people you'd pass on the bus. And they had one thing I really liked about it, because they really embraced this in the early world building stuff, was something called HunterNet. Basically old school Usenet groups and news groups. For those of you who are really young, news groups used to be, think of them as like mini Facebook groups that you had to use email to post in. And at the time, a lot of these news groups would be really scummy, and you would see a lot of not nice things. Like, we're talking some real dark web shit on there, but you'd also find more boring ones. Like, hey, here's a news group dedicated to, I don't know, gardening, but here's one dedicated to Garfield or whatever. But there was one secret group in the World of Darkness meta that was called Hunter.net, and there would be meta characters from that universe who would post like, hey, this is Hunter 01. Did you hear what happened in Seattle? Did you hear what happened to Warlock 45? They haven't checked in a couple of days. What's kind of going on? And I always thought that was really, really, really interesting, how humanity finally had a chance to fight back, and we were using technology and weapons to fight back against these creatures. And that really got my attention. In the World of Darkness, there was even a source book printed called The Time of Judgment, because certain lines didn't get their meta plots fully resolved. Like, there was a game based on big mummies, I think. Mm-hmm. There was one called The Forsaken, the Prothean or something, like there's all, or the Prometheans or something. I don't know, something weird. And it was cool. And then that Christmas as well, I got, I think it was second or third edition, maybe a little bit later, Call of Cthulhu, the game that needs no introduction, done by Chaosium, Sandy Peterson, and it's Lovecraftian horror, usually set in the 1920s, but there is a variant of that game I didn't find out till many years later called Delta Green. Delta Green technically updates the setting. So after the Insolmouth raid of like 1922, where we bomb the hell out of the Deep Ones with King Dagon and Mother Hydra, or maybe I've got that reversed. Basically, the government's aware of Cthulhu mythos threats. They train like black ops soldiers, like, okay, so there's an interdimensional space thing and we need you to go kill it. You're probably going to die, so good luck. And basically, it was like the X-Files with Uzis. But you could have some really good adventures there, because not everybody wants to role playing during the Great Depression. Although one thing I did notice, and a few companies are doing this now, most notably Modifius is publishing a game called Achtung Cthulhu, which happens during World War II and blends World War elements with Cthulhu mythos, because the Nazis were into the occult and whatnot. So what if Hitler got a hold of the Necronomicon, or what if, Mussolini had got some of these ancient texts that could resurrect the dead or fortify soldiers or whatnot, stuff like that. And it's always like Nazi weird science sort of thing. And I thought that was really fascinating too, because I never, again, at the time when I looked at Call of Cthulhu, would thought of Cthulhu mythos elements entering in ordinary scenarios. I think in the book that I had, there were two starting scenarios. There was, I think the adventure was called Dead Man's Stomp, where there's a trumpet given to a jazz player in 1920s Louisiana, and he has lost his wife, but the trumpet was given to him by Narleth Hotep, and it would raise the dead. So he goes to resurrect his wife, and as you can guess, shenanigans ensue. And it was really cool. And then there was another adventure. I don't remember a whole lot about this one, but I think it was called The Thing in the House. And there's this abandoned house outside of Arkham, Massachusetts, which is where this set is usually set, or most adventures. And it's a dimensional shambler or an invisible stalker, something like that. I can't remember precisely what the creature is. And it keeps murdering people in this house because there's an open gateway there. But you have to use a ritual to close it, but to do so, it's going to cost you some sanity, which in Call of Cthulhu is worth more than hit points realistically. And it's a very good introductory adventure. Although running horror games, I ran into this problem up until remarkably recently, like within the last 5 years. Running horror games for my friends was near impossible. I did have one or two really good sessions of Vampire where I basically blended the Cthulhu mythos because I read Cthulhu Punk at the time, and where I used to live in a little place called Owen Sound, Ontario, I had it so a great old one was sleeping at the bottom of the lake under the water and under the rock, and it had just gone undiscovered for so many years because, magic and whatnot. And to stop them, it would have required the death of an innocent. And my players, and I guess this is why they tell you folks to be very mindful of what emotions you stir up at the table. Role playing should be fun. Let's get that out of the way. And emotion and role playing can be emotionally investing and very rewarding, but you don't want to poke trauma where you don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this was an early kind of learning on my behalf. I mean, now I know how to manipulate emotion and not be an asshole, but I was like 15 years old, so I didn't know any better. And I just tried to run Call of Cthulhu in high school, and I don't think I've ever told this story before. Man, I've been going for like 20 minutes. And I had printed out all these telegrams inviting my investigators, because that's what they're called in Call of Cthulhu, and trying to get them to investigate this murder at like a train station or something. And there was something weird about it. The problem is my group didn't talk to each other as to who they were playing. So I had a private investigator. Okay, cool. I had a former World War One vet or World War II vet, and a debutante who's just rich and had money but could get places. And the group fell apart after, not even before the first session started. And that was very discouraging. I've only ever run 2 successful Call of Cthulhu games. One you can hear on Terrible Warriors, that I ran, I don't know, probably about 4 years ago. And when I ran Ravenloft on Terrible Warriors as well. Those are the 2 times I've successfully run horror, and it's worked out pretty well for me. But yeah, I've reviewed multiple horror games. Like right now, most recently, I've reviewed the Aliens Colonial Marines Operations Manual from Free League Publishing. Alien is a wonderful game for horror, and it does some interesting mechanics. But we'll talk about that a little bit later because I've been rambling on for nearly half an hour. So, Skyblaze, what are some of your experiences in tabletop or LARPing role playing when it comes to horror stuff?
Similar to you, I ran across the World of Darkness pretty early. The first game that I was actually in of that world was actually a mage game. And because of where the game was set in Sheffield where I lived, and this is when I was still a student, so it was actually the Student Role-Playing Society that introduced me to it.
Mm-hmm.
If you fancy being involved in role playing and you have a university near you, check if they've got a role playing society. Because quite a lot of the time they've got like a library of books, and it's much cheaper than having to buy your own source books. And because Sheffield is in Mage. The Ascension, the kind of enemies are a group called the Technocracy, who their aim is to kind of make everyone believe that magic and the supernatural don't exist, and so because of the way that reality works in that universe, that would mean if people believe it doesn't exist, it kind of stops existing. And the mages want to kind of reverse this and make everyone what they refer to as awaken and recognize that magic is a force that exists. So Sheffield is very, very famous for being a steel producing industry. We have a lot of very old industrial buildings around the place. And there's one of them which is the most cyberpunk looking building in the world. It's called Forge Masters, if you look it up on Google. It looks like something out of Blade Runner. And that place was the kind of technocracy home base. And at one point, the group I was in decided that we were going to have a look at it and, find out what's going on. And this went badly.
As most often things do in Mage.
Yep. Because there's a system called Paradox, wherein if you use magical powers and you either aren't subtle enough about it, because remember that belief influences reality. So if you do something that is impossible and enough people see you do it, the universe will punish you. And this happened to somebody in our group. And it turns out that the technocracy actually trapped the place, and the traps exploded. Because he botched the dice roll.
Oh.
He was then forbidden from rolling his own dice for the rest of the time. No, you are not permitted with these. You are to do too much damage with them. I was fine, because I was playing a Verbena mage who had the ability to heal themselves, but everybody else was kind of very crispy. One thing I did want to mention, though, was I've actually managed to sort of traumatize some of my tabletop players. This wasn't even a horror game. It was a game series I ran called Kingdom Chaos, and it was a kind of mishmash of a whole bunch of different game universes. And I had a theme I used for when the big bad was doing something nasty. Because I like to use music in the background of when I'm running sessions, which is why I prefer in-person gaming.
Mm-hmm.
And the theme I used was a track from the Dot Hack Sign anime, and it's called Aura Evil. And to this day, and it's been more than 10 years now, the people who were playing in that game will kind of like freak out if that track plays for any reason at all. You're like, oh god, what's happening? It's fine, it's just a song. But yeah, what you're saying about Hunter the Reckoning, I was in a Hunter game as well, playing a only partially awakened mage, so didn't have full control over her abilities. And this vampire dude was trying to channel all the energy from the ley lines into himself, which would have been bad. So my baby mage decided that she was going to tap the ley lines as well. There are two ways. There's two ways this could have gone: phenomenal cosmic power, or death. Luckily, the dice were on my side. But it was like, they probably only have like 5 years to live after this. And it also bleached their hair and skin white, so they now look like an albino.
Oh.
So, which was fine, but yeah, interesting. Horror, I think, is one of the hardest tabletop games to get right. Because so much of it relies on atmosphere. And it's very difficult to get the atmosphere right if you're in like a brightly lit room.
Surrounded by like a couple of hundred people.
Yeah.
The first time I ran Call of Cthulhu, I did this during high school, during my lunch hour at noon hour on like a Thursday. Yeah, no, not exactly conducive to big scary monsters.
Yeah. You really want kind of slightly dimmed lighting and candles, real or fake. And atmospheric music. That's my opinion on it anyway. Because yeah, trying to do World of Darkness games in the Students' Union of University of Sheffield, which is incredibly brightly lit, and there's like 100 members of the role-playing society. Not exactly the right kind of atmosphere. I'll tell you a thing I do want to do though. There's a game I really want to run, and I've got this idea for a tabletop campaign with the storyline based on Fatal Frame.
Oh, interesting.
I really want to do that, but it's the eternal problem of every tabletop GM: managing to get enough people and their schedules to line up.
Yeah, which is basically it's if you can make that happen, you have rolled a cosmic D20 and you got a nat 20, because this does not happen. The fact that people do it so often is literally cosmic math at work.
Mm-hmm.
Like hell, you and I can attest to this when we tried to put together the tabletop campaign for Fools Who Ride. Getting that scheduling, mostly due to me because I do so much stuff with Twig, but with you in a different time zone, Kat in a different time zone, Billy in a different time zone. That was cosmologically hard.
Yep.
In fact, would you like to know? I'm not going to do it now because I'm just going to tell you. Do you want to know what I was going to do for season 2 of Fools Who Ride?
Yeah, go on.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to lay out the whole plot. Here we go. So it would happen about a year later. You're all living in the city of Cambridge. Lord Kill still has his son locked up because he's still nuts. But peace has more or less returned to the land. So about 6 months later, a bright fireball appears in the sky, loud boom, crash. It's a meteorite, right? Most people think, oh, wow, that happens every so often, even in the far-off lands of Faerun and D&D. Space still exists. So what happens is that meteorite wasn't a meteorite. It was a crashed ship. So that ship happened to be holding xenomorph eggs. So the Kingdom of Ordo, one of its court mages decided, you know what? I'm going to make a grab for power because nobody knows that I have all these. So what he would do is he would raise a xenomorph queen who would then breed him eggs. He would then capture people, impregnate them with face huggers, wipe their memories, and send them home. So basically, the xenomorphs would then wipe out their enemies, or it's a convenient assassin that they never see coming. So the PCs would be hired by the Kingdom of Ordo saying, hey, you know what? Our kingdoms have been at war long enough. It's time. Let's stick a pin in this and be done with it. So the PCs would go to rescue this person, like another lord's daughter or something, from this camp of bandits. And the fight would go remarkably easy, and 2 of the bandits would be dead from chest bursters. You would never see, like, the big reveal wasn't going to happen yet. So you would escort this daughter home, and then you would go to return the daughter at home. And the king or whoever would be like, okay, cool, guys. Thank you very much. We want to extend our hospitality. We'll make sure you have a full escort back to Cambridge. But please enjoy the food. Enjoy the company. My home is now your home for the evening. Cool. Daughter dies in the middle of the night. Assassin. That's what everybody thinks. So this place has a magical lockdown. Nothing goes in. Nothing goes out for 24 hours until reinforcements can be called in, or the court mage drops the spell. So over the course of 24 hours, a xenomorph, a drone, just a drone, maybe a warrior, because in the world of aliens get bigger, from what I understand, by eating metal. What is everything in D&D made out of? So what happens when it starts eating magical metal? And they're obviously not official, but there are some pretty good looking stats for warrior drones and Praetorians, which are larger drones that would guard a queen in D&D if you look on some of the D&D wikis. So the PCs would slay this alien or it would escape, and they'd be like, oh my god, what the hell was that? And then I would leave a trail of breadcrumbs, and there's a new book that came out last year called Rime of the Frost Maiden. And because I never see anybody in D&D use the environmental rules, I was going to bring you up to Icewind Dale, which is north of Baldur's Gate, and it's basically winter. It's always the Antarctic. And I was going to have you guys, you have to think about winter clothing. How are you going to move in this terrain? I was going to use levels of exhaustion. And I was going to have you come across the court mage's camp where he's been sending out all these infected people, and you'd come across a hive. And basically you have to do what Ripley does in Aliens and nuke the entire place from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. And I was going to introduce like more magical elements. I was going to have a queen that had like runes drawn on her crest and sort of thing. So it's not like she could cast spells, but she would have maybe damage resistance, or maybe at will could cast magic missile as a defensive action sort of thing. And that was going to be the big thing for that. And then at the end of it, I was going to have a lone warrior comes in. You don't get a good look at them because they're invisible. And then I was just going to play the Predator clip. And that was going to be the ending of that particular session. So that's what season 2 was going to be. Now that I've told you, what do you think?
Interesting.
Yeah.
The trick would have been stopping people from metagaming, I think.
Yeah. Well, the fact that Kat has never seen the Alien movies, and there are creatures in D&D that breed very close to the alien. Like there's a creature called a slod, and they look, when they're in their baby form, look remarkably like chest bursters. And in Icewind Dale, they actually tell you straight out in Rime of the Frost Maiden, when slods are born, they burst out of people's chests. So if you rolled a nature or an arcana check, like, yeah, this looks like a slod. Weird. And that's how I would have kind of played it up until you know, the 6-foot creature with metal teeth and big tubules coming out of its back. Yeah. I'll admit, it would have been fun to see Gonzo talk his way out of this one. Sorry, pal, you're not going to do well against acid for blood. But yeah, I wanted to do that because I thought it would be really fun and interesting. And as I did with like Terrible Warriors for years, I'm known as the crossover guy. I crossed over Aliens with Star Wars and the Star Destroyer falling into a brown dwarf.
You know what I was saying about Kingdom Chaos? The second game in that series was a bunch of video game characters in the reboot universe with elements of Tron.hack.
Interesting.
Yes.
When I was playing regularly with Terrible Warriors, we had a game. The guy who runs D20 Live, his name is Big Mike. You should check him out on YouTube. He also does a bunch of like Twitch stuff too. He did what we called video game expendables, and the players who we all were could pick any character we wanted from any universe. And I think we were fighting against Mega Man, or Samus Aran was the destroyer. Like something had corrupted them.
And one of the player characters in Kingdom Chaos was Samus Aran.
I picked Commander Shepard as the Fem Shep because when we started Terrible Warriors back in 2012, I had just finished Mass Effect 3 and I was still on that hype train. And yeah, I remember shoving a shotgun in somebody's mouth and I was like, eat this. It was ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, with like horror role playing, you're right, getting the atmosphere is so right. And as a game master, I find the challenges are often picking the right words and how you describe a scene. Like one thing I did notice when we were playing Fools Who Ride last year is when I described the bodies that were in the crypt that this dead god had kind of desecrated, and you had to hide among them. And I'm thinking, because I know I got an unnerving reaction out of Cat. And it's all about, this is where physical body language plays a very big part into it, because I, much like you, I prefer in person, but because of, COVID, and now that I'm handicapped, it's a little bit harder. But when you're a game master and you're playing in person, you can watch people's body language, you can watch their tells. And if you're a good student of human nature, I don't consider this evil, maybe lawful evil. Watch their body language, and if you can emotionally play with them. Manipulate is too strong a word, because you're not doing this with evil intent.
Eliciting a response.
Exactly. That's what you want. You want to be like a good filmmaker and provoke a response. And you're right. It's hard to do when you're in a room full of people. It's brightly lit. It's noon. Hell, they're probably playing salsa music or something stupid. It's just, it's hard. And doing it in tabletop can be difficult. Doing it in LARP, in my experience, has been downright impossible. And allow me to tell you. So once upon a time, a long time ago, in a town that was very, very stupid and still far away, thank Christ for that, a place called Owen Sound, I used to play in a Vampire the Masquerade LARP. Allow you to laugh now. And it was run by the most, how would I describe this storyteller? And I use that term remarkably loosely. He would metagame out the ass. Basically, this guy had every single clan book, every single book for every single line, knew every single relationship across the board, which is fine. If you want to be a well-informed storyteller, that's cool. I love that you know the lore, until you use it against the players intentionally. And it got to the point where there was one time, I remember this incident remarkably clearly. He called me in the middle of the workday. And at that time, I was volunteering my time for a local kind of television station, and it was my day off. And I just remember, I'm tired. I just want to sleep today. I've been at the hockey rink more often than what I want to be, or City Hall or something stupid. And he calls me and says, "Hey, Mike, what is your character doing right now?" I don't know, not existing. And it was, I'm glad they called to check up on downtime, because in certain D&D games and other role-playing games, there is a system designed for downtime. Like, your character isn't just sitting around with a thumb up their butt. It's basically how you would earn money. Are you maintaining a family? Like, what are you doing? Because your character isn't just murder hobo. And I just found this very, very, very odd. But I remember he would give his wife, who played with us, who was a remarkable human being, she was given the power of celerity, and in vampire terms, basically supernaturally fast. But she got it at the stupidest, highest level possible, so she could Agent Smith dodge everything. And she could punch you through basically reality if she wanted to. And it just got so dumb. I remember one specific point. The Seneschal, who's basically like the second in charge above or below the prince of the city. There's a whole bureaucracy to vampire. I'll explain that sometime. Basically, so the second in charge somehow, and I'm going to repeat this word for word because it's always stuck with me, has a nuclear submarine in the West Edmonton Mall. Allow that to sink in for a moment. That was armed, by the way, with nukes. What? Yeah. So there was that. So one of my first experiences with this, I just come into this group of friends, and I had known the wife since high school, and another guy I used to be friends with decided, hey, this looks like fun. We used to play D&D in high school. It's something for us to do on Saturday nights. We'll meet at this place in Owen Sound. We'll dress up. For us, it just meant let's dress in black, and that's it. That's the extent of our LARPing abilities. Some people came in full face paint. His name was Ollie a few times, and unfortunately he's passed away. So creator, rest his soul, and some other people. But the storyteller and his wife, we come to the game, and it starts out okay, but I'm starting a new character. So my background at the time was I can't remember what the term is for a person who's from the Guru who hasn't turned kin. I was kinfolk because I really was leaning into my native heritage. Even back then, I kind of knew that I was Ojibwe. I was from the local reservation, Cape Croker, because our game took place in Owen Sound. So I'm thinking, cool, I'm kinfolk to the Guru, but I've been turned into a vampire so I can play, vampire. So I'm considered an outcast and should be destroyed on sight. So fortunately, my GM or my storyteller at the time gave me a story that night where the Guru were coming to Owen Sound to hunt for me, and that was it. They were going to protect me under the prince. And then the story somehow got shanghaied from me. It got stolen right out from under me, and my character survived, but I had nothing to do in the city since that. And when you go to play every Saturday night from basically once it got dark around 8 or 9 p.m. during the summer until about 2 or 3 in the morning, where we'd go to breakfast afterwards at a local kind of diner, you expect something to happen. And the storylines just kept getting more and more ridiculous. And it just more or less ended up people hanging out, dressing in black, smoking cigarettes, and looking cool. I'll even admit one time I even brought my Highlander katana because I thought I was cool. Yeah, don't bring real weapons to a LARP ever. You will get the cops called. That never happened to me, but word of warning, folks, especially in this 2021 world, you don't know. And it was just LARPing really turned me off. I even went to a LARP in Toronto. I visited an old girlfriend of mine just to kind of hang out for a weekend because we hadn't seen each other in a while. And I went to the Toronto game, and that's where I met my friend Darla for the first time. I knew them under a different name. And even in Toronto, I'm thinking, does every LARP suck, or is it just me? Because I remember the first time I got introduced to the idea of LARP, okay. I first learned about LARP in 2 separate ways. And one of these stories I know I've never told. So in Star Wars, which is my first real love, really, Star Wars West End Games 2nd edition expanded and revised. It has the Falcon on the cover. In my opinion, it's the best Star Wars role-playing game ever printed. Fight me. And they talk about in the back of one of the adventure journals Star Wars LARP, and they show people in Hoth Trooper rebel gear fighting stormtroopers, but they mention in the write-up, this happens in a hotel hallway, and they expected you to rent out spaces or find spaces to play publicly where you would play your characters. I'm thinking, that sounds really awesome. And then I can't remember how this came about, probably on Usenet, to be honest with you. I found a local group that was doing live action role playing, but it was D&D style. And they had something called boffer weapons. And they're basically swords covered in foam and shit. And I got invited out to this thing at this campground. It was the fall, so it was really starting to get cold. So me and my friend Dave go there. And immediately, Skyblaze, do you remember the YouTube video very early on in the old days, in the long ago, where this guy's going, lightning bolt, lightning bolt?
Mm-hmm.
I experienced that. Oh boy, but it was weirder than that. So I'm playing as an NPC because I haven't earned the right to be a PC yet. Okay, strike one. And I'm playing a skeleton, and I've been watching a lot of Highlander, the series, at the time, so I thought I'm fucking Doug McLeod. I'm gonna kick your ass. There could be only one. And we're expected to fight these PCs, and I'm just beating this PC up with a sword, and he's like, "Stop hitting so hard! Don't be so good." And I'm like, "Okay, well, do you want to challenge or not?" Okay. So we do that for an afternoon. I get pelted with bird seed for a few hours. And I look at my friend Dave. I'm like, Dave, this is really fucking stupid. Do we have to stay? He's like, yeah, we did pay for the weekend. So our dinner that night was a cold can of zoodles. So we get tucked into this campground's, I guess it used to be the mess hall or something. So all the tables are gone. It's like a big kind of barracks. So we get on our cots, we get on our sleeping bags, and we go to sleep for the night. I forgot where I was. So I woke up in the morning and I'm like, where the fuck am I? And I woke up with a start, and I think I broke the cot because I looked at Dave and like, dude, where the fuck am I? So that was fun. Maybe a portent of mental illness. Who knows? And we left that morning. We're like, okay, guys, been fun. See you later. Fuck off. And that was most of my LARPing experience. That was the beginning of my LARPing experience. I guess I shouldn't have expected too much
As
from it,
LARPing
all
goes,
things
that's
considered.
actually really terrible.
Let's see. What
I
else
know
can
a
we
lot.
talk about, Skyblaze? Have you ever LARPed?
I haven't, but I know a lot of friends of mine who have, and based on what they've told me, that was a really, really bad LARP. They're usually much better organized, and in LARP here, so most of the LARP systems here, there's a lot of crossover between what we refer to as HEMA, the historical European martial arts people, and reenactment people and LARPers. There's a lot of the Venn diagram is practically a circle for those three groups. So you do get quite a lot of people who actually do know how fighting works, really. And if you try and dick about, then you will get your ass kicked. And yeah, like, stop hitting so hard. Yeah, okay, pull your blows a bit, but that's not the sort of behavior I would expect from most experienced LARPers, from what I understand.
Yeah, it's just something that I don't get. Like, I think LARPing is the hardest thing to get right. I don't know. Have you ever seen that documentary World of Darkness?
No.
Okay, so there's a documentary that came out, like, I guess within the last 10 years anyway, and it talks about White Wolf and their founding, their history, and unfortunately one of their founders has passed away a couple of years ago. And they go to New Orleans, and you see the extent of the costumes and the experience that people go to, or the lengths people go to, rather, to create an epic LARP experience. And I always wanted that, and especially now, because you and I have been to multiple conventions. We've seen the astounding skills that come out of the cosplay community.
Mm-hmm.
And you think of people, and I'm going to use this, probably a bad example, but the Star Wars community has the 501st, which is like screen accurate costuming from anything from stormtroopers to imperial officers all the way down to the lowest ranking kind of rebel soldier. And can you imagine for a weekend getting like a hotel that you can dress up a little bit, or maybe have a few of the big conference areas, and role playing with like real stormtroopers, or like getting like orders from like a girl who looks like Leia with the hair all done up? Do you know how much fun that would be if you could immerse yourself? And that's something that horror role playing, for example, more specifically, I think is something very, very inspired, is horror role playing. If you get the right people, the right storyteller, the right environment, you can really immerse yourself in it. And that's probably why I kept role playing for so long. Not necessarily in horror role playing, because I wanted that sense of immersion that I thought these games could bring to life. Is like, you've played mage, I've played vampire, and I've played a little bit of hunter. And I thought those worlds were really neat, and there's a cool sense of immersion there. With Call of Cthulhu, when I ran it, I genuinely disturbed my players the second time, and I did it on Terrible Warriors. Maybe didn't handle the finale as well as I would have liked, but it worked, and I got people emotionally invested. And I think that's, I don't know, to me, that's the draw of horror role playing, is that you can do it without having to do gross out humor, or not gross out humor, gross out gore, because part of the horror movie is the gore is the reveal, and that's the punchline, but it's everything leading up to it is like telling a joke. And if you can hook people with the right story, the right emotions, the right verbs, and as you mentioned, using atmosphere, using music and other senses, you can really draw people in and really elicit the right response. And that's fear and it's joy. One good example I can think of this, and I guess we'll begin to kind of wrap up here, is I was playing Terrible Warriors a number of years ago, and I was game mastering a scene in Ravenloft, and I decided to do a riff on Evil Dead. So they come across this cabin, and it's the safest place in the woods, and they need a place to hole up for the night. And they can hear laughter. They can hear like footsteps running all around the cabin. They don't know what it is. And they really start to freak out. And I say, hey, you come across a cellar. Do you want to go check it out? And, don't go in the cellar. That's never going to end well for you. So guess where they went. They're like, okay, guys, we're ready. And just like in Ghostbuster, get her, Ray. And they go in the hole. It's a family of weasels. And my players are like, oh, thank God. We thought it was Cthulhu. I'm just like, nope, weasels. They just wanted some food. So my players fed the weasels and they made friends. And then it ended terribly. But yeah, like there's just something about horror role playing. If you can do it right, it's really fun. It's rewarding. And with games like Alien, if you know the lore, you can do it like Alien, which is the one of the best haunted house movies ever. It just happens to be in space. We've seen video games do it with like Dead Space and stuff like that, though that leans a little more into the gore.
I've seen, I've heard of a friend of mine was doing a Warhammer 40k Dark Heresy campaign that was based on Event Horizon.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I imagine that worked very, very well.
Yeah, like there are tons of places to draw inspiration for horror kind of role playing. Some of the game systems I wanted to mention, there's one that's based on, there are two of them that I can think that are based specifically on zombies. There is one called All Flesh Must Be Eaten.
Yep.
Which is very cool. I like its system a lot. There's another one done by Palladium called Dead Rain. And it's pretty well supported. I actually have a full set of books signed by Kevin Simbita for whatever that counts for. Which I thought the idea behind their zombies was very cool. The fact that their zombies, they are walking corpses, but they're picking up on your psychic energy. So if you're around, like it doesn't matter whether you're quiet or whatever, they'll find you one way or another. If not, they know you're there. And I found that remarkably interesting. And the books are very, very cool just to read from a lore perspective. Even Rifts itself has a number of horror themed books for some of the different locations and factions. There's like, I think Africa sourcebook has like a zombie nation or something. Trying to think of other good horror role playing.
Don't Rest Your Head, if you've never come across that one.
Mm-hmm.
Which is basically there are horrifying things that are basically invisible to most people unless you are in a state of extreme insomnia.
That's weird. That sounds cool.
It's a very interesting game. And extremely effective if done with a good DM.
There was another game.
I will send you a link, actually.
Okay. There's another game I've never played, but I see the potential in it really well. So it's a game, I think it's called Little Nightmares.
Oh, yeah.
It's a game you play as children and you're living their nightmares. So I always had this idea, and you can see where this is going already. Nightmare on Elm Street. Like if you just age the kids up to like 14, bring them into high school at the very least, have them fight Freddy or something like that. Another game, it was right on the tip of my tongue. Shit, it's gonna drive me
I
nuts.
was going to mention the Dresden Files RPG.
Yes!
It has a lot of horror-based stuff you can do in the Dresden Files.
Which that's a series you folks should be reading or listening to. I listened to the first book on Audible. I think it was narrated by James Marsters, actually. So that's quite good. Let's think of there's another one. It's done by Free League Publishing, the same guys that do Alien. It's called Tales from the Loop. And you might be thinking, really? Tales from the Loop, if you play it like Stranger Things, can be really cool. There's a source book called Tales from the Flood, which gives you more ideas, but it's an alternate 1980s. There's this nuclear particle accelerator or something, and weird shit happens. So it's kind of like that, but there's also Fallout style robots and stuff, but things like the Commodore 64 and the Nintendo also exist at the same time. But there might be like Protectotrons, like from Fallout, walking around at the same time. And that game also has a mechanic where you never die. So your kids truly never die, and I always found that really interesting. If you put them in peril but don't kill them, that's interesting. There is a Ghostbusters RPG. It was made by West End Games. It came out in the 1980s. It is ludicrously expensive. I got a box set a couple of years ago, and I saved and scrimped for it. And you're gonna be shocked at this price, Skyblaze. I think at the time I paid £160 for it.
Oof.
Yeah, so I went all in, but the box was in really good shape. The books were in even better shape. It even had the dice for it. So I'm like, and you know what? I've seen this come up once. I think I'm missing 2 source books, and I've got the entire line for it. But yeah, there was also another release when Ghostbusters 2 came out where they updated some of the rules. I think they gave you the slime blower, and the game is still supported by certain communities, I think on Reddit and just out there on the internet as a whole. There are good horror role-playing games out there. You are not just limited to D&D. However, if you do dig that, Ravenloft is a really cool setting. I think even if you had the right setting or the right storyteller, you could really play up Dark Sun to be scary. Because the idea of dying of thirst and going nuts is something that's, terrifying.
I've just remembered a thing.
Okay.
There's a game called Dread, I think.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with Judge Dredd. But it uses one of the most interesting mechanics I've ever come across for a tabletop game.
Okay.
Everything you want to do, all tasks you want to accomplish, are done by pulling blocks from a Jenga tower.
I've heard of this, but I've heard friends call it the Tower of Terror. Okay. Yeah. The version I was heard about in brief is you set up a Jenga tower and just tell a story, and when your player wants to make a risky decision, ask them to pull a block.
Mm-hmm.
And then you keep going until the tower goes. And yeah, that's a really easy way to get people into role playing. If you don't want to spend $1,000 or whatever on a bunch of books that you may never use, Jenga's like $10.
Yeah.
So if you want to get someone into role playing, say, hey, we're going to try something today. And we're going to talk and we're going to play together. And then you just tell the story. And when they make a decision like, hey, I want to shoot the zombie, but I'm worried the shot's going to be heard. Okay, pull a block. And if they pull the block and nothing happens, the shot goes off, you kill the zombie, nobody heard it. Or if the tower goes, they heard the shot, they get swarmed, the end. But it's a good idea to introduce people to role playing and the consequences of risky actions.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that. So yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. But yeah, there's a lot of variety out there that you can do. You can introduce horror into anything. Like in Star Wars, for example, there was literally a book called Death Troopers where they dealt with zombie stormtroopers. Doctor Who has done scary episodes.
Oh,
so
yeah,
Doctor Who Adventures in Time and Space from Cubicle 7. in the multiple Doctor source books, there are tons of scary bad guys you can pick and choose, or just write your own. Alien by Free League Publishing. Again, if you want to just adapt your own story, you can do that. Vampire the Masquerade is now in its 5th edition. I don't much care for it. It's a fine system, but I'm just although I think through Onyx Press you can get the 20th anniversary editions of most of the old World of Darkness game lines. There was a refresh a couple years ago where there was Vampire the Requiem, Werewolf the Forsaken.
I wasn't a fan of the
Neither
new
was
World of
I.
Darkness.
Well,
It lost a lot of the flavor and the lore that made it interesting.
Yeah, plus the game system I always thought sucked because you needed the main World of Darkness sourcebook before you could use everything else. So it was very modular, which is cool, I guess, but it felt like a cash grab. And I think even in the World of Darkness documentary, they like talk about that. But yeah, there's tons of horror kind of video games too. I mean, obviously Resident Evil, Dead Space, even World War Z, Aftermath, which I reviewed a couple weeks ago. There's tons of good stuff out there. This year had Resident Evil Village, which is fantastic. So there isn't a lot out there that won't sate your appetite in some way. And I hope we've given you kind of a fun overview of tabletop RPGs. I guess if I had to recommend one game to introduce, I'm trying to think of this, Skyblaze. Let's pick 2 games. Just 2. I pick one and you pick one. If you really wanted to get someone into horror role-playing, which one would you recommend first? That doesn't seem overwhelming, is pretty easy, that isn't Dread, for example.
Probably Dresden Files, actually.
Okay. So it requires a little bit of buy into the world, but it's something you'll acclimatize to remarkably fast.
Yeah, there's also, it's not a lot of kind of, you're not throwing numbers at somebody because it's very kind of cinematic and very story based. So that kind of like will ease people into that. It's one of the off-putting things for me about D&D, because I have dyscalculia, so I have trouble with numbers. One of the off-putting things about things like D&D or GURPS a bit, but some of the older systems with like the stat blocks, which went on for pages and pages and pages, is like, it's a bit scary. So if you give people a story, then, and say, the character sheet is basically you telling your character's backstory, and I think that's a lot easier to deal with.
I think for my recommendations, I'm going to kind of cheat. I'm going to recommend one that's more narrative-based, one if you want a little bit more crunch. For narrative-based, I'm going to recommend Tales from the Loop / Tales from the Flood from Free League Publishing. And the main reason I'm recommending that, as you just described, it's more narrative-based. Plus, if your players don't necessarily read the book when it comes to game mastering settings, you don't have to use the default setting, which sets the game in Sweden. You can set it anywhere realistically and just move the particle accelerator to, I don't know, Welland, Ontario, or Regina, Saskatchewan, or even, I don't know, Boulder, Colorado, or something. You can do it anywhere and just introduce weird elements. And if you're very much into that Stranger Things vibe, you can tell a story. And if your players think they're in danger, you can do it as long as you weave the right tale. And it's not numbers heavy. Numbers don't come up very often. Plus, everyone's digging that retro vibe right now anyway. So use the tools you got. The other one I would recommend, and I'm basing this mostly off the success of Lovecraft Country, is Call of Cthulhu. Yes, it is a little numbers heavy, but almost anybody you're playing with probably knows who Cthulhu is, but they're not going to know who Gyanki is or Ebon, or they may have heard of the Necronomicon because of Evil Dead, but it's a setting, it's a game that you can go retro to Victorian era. So Cthulhu by Gaslight, you can do the 1920s, which is typically typically the default setting for it, and set it during the Depression, any of the World Wars, just anything before 1950 typically. You could play Delta Green variant, which moves it into the 1990s or the modern setting, and do that. And you could slowly introduce the worlds of horror, because not everything in Cthulhu is necessarily a unseen horror from beyond space and time. Like, there are vampires in there, but they're not the same vampires you and I would expect. Or some of these creatures are just that. They're just creatures that are aliens, like the Migo or the fungi from Yugoth. They want minerals. They really don't care about humanity unless you get in their way. And if you do, you're going to end up as a brain in a case. So there are interesting ideas you can play with. Plus the fact that your players don't know the lore, but they know the world they inhabit right now. You can introduce weirder elements. Hell, if you wanted to introduce a Resident Evil style storyline, what if some corporation right now is playing with powers they don't understand? And I know with all people having conspiracy theories seemingly coming out of nowhere in the headlines recently, you could really turn that on its head and kind of play with it a little bit. Like, for example, why are all the billionaires so interested in getting to space right now and proving that it works? Just an idea. Or why are certain billionaires buying doomsday bunkers in the middle of Texas? Stuff like that. So ideas you can play with. So those would be our recommendations. I'm really sorry. This was a lot of me just kind of rambling. So I hope, Skyblaze, you got something out of this.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, so next time, folks, we're going to come back in November. I'm not sure what we're going to be talking about. It'll be something fun anyway. So this has, once again, been a fun collaboration between Nerd to the Third Power, Skyblaze, and obviously here on ThisWeekInGeek.net. This has been the B-side. So I guess before we take off, we are starting to run into the holiday season. So if you're out shopping and whatnot, be nice to everybody that you're coming across. They need to make a living just as much as you do. Don't be an asshole. Get your vaccine, wear your mask, be safe, be courteous, be nice. So I guess let's kind of roll things out here. So for the B-side, I've been
Skyblaze.
I've been Mike the Birdman, saying be excellent to each other, and happy Halloween, guys. We'll catch you guys again next month, right here on ThisWeekInGeek.net.
I just got a call from your friend Kyle's mother. She said that this show is naughty and might make you a potty mouth.
You've been listening to Nerd to the Third Powers, the B-side, with Skyblaze and Birdman. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for the show, please feel free to email us at mike@thisweekingeek.net. We look forward to hearing from you.
Do I have to remind you that we are a network affiliate? And we're in competition with other networks, not with a bunch of punks broadcasting out of a closet?
This concludes our broadcast day.